He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades.
Behind palace walls, according to multiple royal insiders, something has been quietly moving. Not an announcement. Not a ceremony. Something smaller, and in some ways far more telling. Duties are shifting, access is widening. And a king who waited 70 years for this crown is now facing a question no father ever wants to face. Is his body giving him a deadline his family isn't ready to hear? March. Windsor. A state banquet like 100 before it. Except this one felt different. Inside St. George's Hall, the chandeliers burned gold over the President of Nigeria's official visit. Protocol officers checked their earpieces. Footmen lined the walls like statues. And at the center of it all, the man who was supposed to hold the room simply couldn't. King Charles looked small. Cameras caught it before commentators could soften it. He slumped slightly in his chair. His movement slowed. For a monarch who spent decades learning how to command a room without saying a word, something had visibly shifted. Beside him, his son did not shrink. He grew. Prince William walked in like a man who already knew the weight of the evening rested on his shoulders.
Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty.
Kate followed, poised, radiant, absolutely certain of her place. Together they didn't look like the heir and his wife waiting politely for their turn. They looked like the future arriving early. Hi viewers, quick question before we go further. Have you ever watched someone you love get tired right in front of you and pretended not to notice? Type yes or no in the comments. I want to see this thread fill up. Because that is exactly what Britain has been doing for months. Watching. Noticing. Saying nothing out loud. If this story pulls at something in you, hit subscribe right now before we go any further. Because what comes next is not tabloid noise. It is a pattern. And once you see the pattern, you will not be able to unsee it. Let's start with the fact nobody disputes. In 2024, King Charles was diagnosed with cancer. The palace confirmed it themselves. No embellishment needed there. That single sentence changed the clock the entire monarchy has been running on ever since. Since that diagnosis, according to insiders speaking to multiple royal outlets, something has accelerated behind closed doors. Not a dramatic collapse. Not a headline-grabbing crisis. Something quieter. Something that looks, on the surface, like ordinary royal business. A prince taking on a few more engagements. A ceremony he now leads instead of attends. A title, grantor of royal warrants, historically reserved for the reigning monarch alone, now reportedly extended to William and Kate. Small print to most people. Enormous to anyone who understands how slowly royal power usually moves. One royal source described it plainly. In many ways, he is already king unofficially. The institution is preparing emotionally, even if the paperwork hasn't caught up yet. Read that again. Emotionally preparing. For a king who is still alive. Still reigning. Still very much on the throne. That sentence alone should stop you in your seat. Because this isn't the story of a crown changing hands. Nobody has signed anything. No abdication has been declared. Buckingham Palace has made no such announcement, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling you fiction dressed up as fact. This is something harder to name. A quiet redistribution. A son stepping forward not because his father surrendered, but because his father's body is asking questions his title cannot answer. And somewhere in that gap, between what is official and what is simply happening, an entire nation has started to feel a shift it cannot quite explain. William, at 43, has spent his whole adult life being told the throne would one day be his. That was never the mystery. The mystery is timing. Nobody not the palace, not the family, not William himself, gets to choose when a body starts running out of patience.
With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground.
So while the cameras focused on protocol and posture at that banquet, something else was happening in the room that no camera could capture. A son watching his father in real time, quietly measuring how much longer they might have to do this together. And a father forced to reckon with the one truth no king wants to face. That preparing his heir for greatness might mean preparing his family for goodbye. Think about that banquet again for a moment. A room full of protocol. A room full of rules written centuries before anyone in it was born. And still, in that room, something unwritten took over. People noticed who commanded the space without needing the title to prove it. That is not gossip. That is instinct. Human beings can feel a shift in power long before any document confirms it. Royal watchers have felt it too. For years, the story of William was patience. The waiting heir. The dutiful son. Second in line behaves one way. First in line behaves differently. And what insiders are now describing is a prince who no longer carries himself like a man waiting his turn. He carries himself like a man already carrying weight. Some of that weight is public. Diplomatic visits. State occasions. The quiet expansion of formal duties most people will never read about in a headline. Some of that weight, according to sources close to the family, is private. Conversations behind closed doors. Decisions about the future that have nothing to do with crowns and everything to do with legacy. And somewhere underneath all of it sits a single, uncomfortable truth. A king does not usually hand his son more responsibility because everything is fine. He does it because he is planning. Quietly. Carefully. On his own terms. Multiple sources have used almost the same language to describe it. Charles will not be seen as pushed.
My father's first words on entering Westminster Abbey yesterday were a pledge of service. It was a pledge to continue to serve, because for over 50 years, in every corner of the UK, across the Commonwealth, and around the world,
he has waited a lifetime for this role. When he steps back, insiders say it will be entirely on his terms. Notice that phrase. When he steps back. Not if. That is the sentence sitting at the center of this entire story. Not a confirmed date. Not a signed declaration. A quiet, repeated certainty among the people closest to the crown that change is coming, and that the only real question left is when. We are going to walk through exactly how we got here. The diagnosis nobody expected to change so much. The quiet powers now shifting toward William. The family tension simmering underneath a public image of unity. And the one test insiders say Charles has placed in front of his son, one that has nothing to do with crowns, and everything to do with whether William is truly ready to lead. Before we go there, if you have made it this far, do one thing for me. Hit that like button. Not because I am asking nicely. Because if you do not, fewer people ever see this story, and that means the next person scrolling past who needed to hear this, never will. Now let's go back to where this quiet shift truly began. Not in a ballroom. Not in a headline. In a diagnosis that changed everything, and a family that has been quietly rearranging itself in silence ever since. Every family has a moment they can point to. A single sentence that splits time into before and after. For the House of Windsor, that sentence came in early 2024. King Charles had cancer. Buckingham Palace confirmed it themselves, in careful, measured language. No theatrics. No specifics about the type. Just enough to tell the world that the man who had waited 70 years to become king was now fighting something no title could protect him from. Pause on that for a second. 70 years of waiting. A lifetime spent as the understudy. And almost the moment the crown finally settled on his head, his own body handed him a deadline nobody had asked for. Hi viewers, Here's a simple one for you. If someone you loved got sick right when their biggest dream finally came true, would you tell them to slow down or keep going? Drop slow down or keep going in the comments. I read every single one.
The world seems to spin ever faster. Our journeying may pause to quieten our minds. In T.S. Eliot's words, at the still point of the turning world.
Because that is the impossible choice Charles has reportedly been living with ever since. Slow down and risk looking like he is stepping aside before he is ready. Keep going and risk his own health paying the price for his pride. According to people close to the family, he chose the second option. He kept moving. State visits. Investitures. A demanding trip to the United States that insiders described as one of the most consequential foreign tours of his reign. One royal source put it plainly. This is one of the biggest tests of his reign because a historically special relationship is now in a difficult position. Difficult and demanding. Long days. Long flights. Long ceremonies that do not pause for anyone's treatment schedule. And the people watching closest, his own family, reportedly grew uneasy. Sources say William has been seriously concerned about his father's health, quietly frustrated that Charles refuses to slow down and take care of himself. Not in public. Not in a statement. In private conversations that only reach us secondhand, through insiders who spoke to royal reporters on condition of anonymity. That is worth sitting with. A son watching his father push through exhaustion in service of a role he waited his entire life to hold. And underneath that concern, something more complicated. Because the same son who worries about his father's health is also, according to multiple reports, the same son now stepping into more and more of that father's responsibilities. Two things can be true at once. Love and urgency. Worry and readiness. A family bracing for change while insisting, publicly, that nothing has changed at all. If this is the first time you're hearing how deep this actually runs, that should tell you something. Hit subscribe now, because most channels are only telling you half of this story. We are telling you all of it. By March of 2026, the physical toll became harder to hide. That state banquet we opened with. The one where Charles looked tired enough that even casual viewers noticed. Courtiers reportedly described him as struggling to keep up with an already reduced schedule. One insider said the demands of these long occasions have become more tedious than ever for him, and that the toll of his treatment has not gone unnoticed by the people around him. Not gone unnoticed. That phrase matters. It means the family knows. The household knows. The people who plan his diary down to the minute know exactly how much this is costing him. And still, publicly, the answer has always been the same. He remains king. He remains on the throne. No abdication has been announced. But rumors, according to several outlets, have quietly intensified. Some sources point to a window sometime around mid-year as a moment worth watching, tied to significant national ceremonies where a transition might feel most natural. Nothing confirmed. Nothing official. Just a pattern experience royal watchers say they have seen before, in other reigns, in other families, when an institution begins preparing itself for a change it has not yet been willing to name. Here is what makes this different from ordinary royal gossip. This isn't rumor for the sake of clicks. This is a diagnosis, confirmed by the palace itself, laid underneath a son who has reportedly been given more formal authority than any Prince of Wales in recent memory. Two real facts, sitting side by side. A confirmed illness. A confirmed expansion of power. Everything else is interpretation. But the shape those two facts make together is impossible to ignore. And that shape is exactly what pushed William into a role nobody expected him to occupy this soon. Think about what it actually means for a modern monarchy to operate this way. There is no manual for this. No official countdown clock. Just a king trying to hold on to duty with both hands, and a family trying to plan for a future nobody wants to say out loud. Royal historians will tell you this isn't new. Monarchs have quietly prepared their heirs for centuries, often without a single public word about why. What makes this moment different is visibility. In an age of phones and long lenses and rolling royal commentary, very little stays quiet for long. A tired posture at a banquet becomes a headline within hours. A new title becomes a signal within days. So even without an official statement, the public has been left to read between the lines. And what they are reading, according to insider accounts, is a family trying to manage two competing instincts at once. Protect the king's dignity. Prepare the heir's future. Some close to the household have suggested Charles is determined to control that narrative himself. Not to be pushed. Not to be rushed. If change comes, insiders say, it will look measured. Deliberate. Entirely on his own terms. That single detail tells you almost everything about the man. Even facing his own mortality, Charles is reportedly determined that this transition, whenever it comes, will not look like defeat. It will look like design. And for William, that creates its own quiet pressure. Because stepping into more responsibility while his father is still alive and still reigning means constantly performing a delicate balancing act in public. Support the king. Never appear to replace him. Show readiness without ever looking impatient. One misstep, one photograph read the wrong way, and the story shifts from a son helping his father to a son circling the throne. William, according to those who know him, is acutely aware of that risk. So the question this chapter leaves us with is simple. If a confirmed illness sits on one side and a confirmed expansion of power sits on the other, what does the space between them actually look like day to day, inside the palace walls? That is where we go next. Not the banquet. Not the diagnosis. The quiet handover of power itself, one warrant, one duty, one small unannounced change at a time. There is a piece of paper most people will never see. It doesn't come with a headline. It doesn't come with a ceremony. It is called a royal warrant, and for centuries, only one person in Britain has ever had the authority to grant one. The reigning monarch. Not the heir. Not the Prince of Wales. The king, and the king alone. So when reports surfaced that William and Kate would begin serving as grantors of royal warrants themselves, most casual observers scrolled past it. Just another royal update. Nothing worth pausing on. They were wrong. One royal insider called it plainly. This is a very significant step. It gives William and Kate real monarchical power earlier than usual, and it signals that they are being fast-tracked for the top job. Read that last phrase again. Fast-tracked. Not eventually. Not someday. Now. Hi viewers, here's one for you. If you found out someone you trusted was quietly being handed your job while you were still technically in charge, would that feel like support, or would it feel like something else? Type support or something else below. I want to see where this audience actually stands. Because that is the exact tension sitting underneath every single one of these small, procedural updates. On paper, this is administrative. Warrants. Investitures. A few more ceremonies added to William's calendar. Courtiers have publicly described these changes as modernization. Routine evolution. Nothing more. But experienced royal watchers see it differently. They describe a household rehearsing a transition while insisting, out loud, that nothing fundamental has changed. Consider what William has reportedly taken on. Investiture ceremonies. High-level receptions. Meetings conducted on his father's behalf rather than alongside him. Each one, individually, looks small. Together, they form a pattern that insiders say has become impossible to ignore. One source close to the household summarized it in a single blunt sentence. He's already king unofficially. The institution is preparing emotionally, even if the paperwork hasn't caught up. That sentence should stop you the same way it stopped royal correspondence when it first surfaced. Because it does not describe a future event. It describes a present reality, one already unfolding, one already being lived inside palace walls while the rest of the world debates whether it is even happening. If a story like this deserves your attention, it deserves your subscription too. Because most channels won't tell you this part. They will show you the smiling photographs and skip straight past what those photographs are quietly signaling. There's another layer here worth sitting with. William, according to multiple sources, is not simply accepting more duties passively. He is reportedly steering parts of the institution directly, using moments when international attention shifts away from London to convene key figures privately. One insider described these as strategic, future-facing conversations with real weight, conversations that are, in the source's words, not designed for public consumption. Not designed for public consumption. In other words, happening exactly where the cameras cannot follow. None of this, insiders are careful to add, is framed as working against Charles. It is framed as preparation. As continuity. As a prince making sure that whenever the moment comes, whether that is years away or far sooner than anyone expects, the machinery of monarchy does not stall. The king, meanwhile, remains firmly on the throne. That fact has not changed, and insiders are quick to reaffirm it every time this story resurfaces. But the transition from heir to leader, according to one source, is no longer theoretical. It is underway. Theoretical to underway. That is the entire story compressed into 4 words. Consider how strange that sentence would have sounded a decade ago. William was, for most of his adult life, the patient one. The dutiful one. The heir who let the story belong to his father and later to his grandmother without ever appearing to reach for more than his role required. That reputation was not an accident. It was carefully built, year after year, engagement after engagement. What insiders describe now is a departure from that pattern. Not rebellion. Not ambition in the dramatic sense. Something closer to necessity. A prince responding to circumstances he did not create, adjusting his posture because the ground beneath the family has genuinely shifted. Not everyone agrees on how far this shift has actually gone. That is worth saying clearly, because this story has 2 very different versions circulating at once, and neither one has been confirmed outright by the palace. One royal commentator put it this way. Some outlets say William is running things from the shadows. Others say the king is still very much in charge. The commentator's own conclusion leaned toward the latter, noting that Charles waited a very long time to become king and is unlikely to relinquish that role quietly. That single quote captures the entire disagreement at the heart of this story. 2 competing narratives, both plausible, both fed by real insiders, both impossible to fully verify from the outside. What is not in dispute is this. William's public visibility has expanded. His diplomatic engagements have increased. His presence at the center of major family decisions has become harder to overlook. Whether that amounts to him quietly running the monarchy or simply a modern king wisely delegating more to a well-prepared heir depends entirely on which source you choose to believe. And underneath all of it sits Kate. Her own cancer diagnosis in 2024 placed her on a parallel journey through treatment and recovery, one that has drawn its own wave of public concern and speculation. As she has returned to public life, reports suggest she is focused on her own causes, determined to keep contributing in her own right rather than simply standing beside her husband as a supporting figure. That detail matters more than it might first appear. Because whatever is happening to Charles, whatever is happening to William, this family has spent the better part of 2 years managing illness, recovery, and public scrutiny all at once, while still being expected to perform certainty in front of cameras every single time they step outside. Certainty in public. Uncertainty in private. That gap is where this story truly lives. And that gap is exactly what has started testing relationships across the entire family, not just between father and son, but across brothers, in-laws, and the wider household trying to hold everything steady. That collision, between private preparation and public perception, is exactly where the tension inside this family starts to surface. Not in warrants. Not in ceremonies. In the relationships being tested underneath all of it. June the 13th, 2026. Trooping the Colour. The King's official birthday parade, marking the third such ceremony since Charles took the throne. Every year, this event follows the same rhythm. Over 1,000 soldiers marching down the Mall. Military bands filling the air with the same processional music that has echoed through this ceremony for generations. Horse Guards parade, packed with spectators who arrived hours early just to catch a glimpse of the balcony moment everyone actually came for. On the surface, it looked like unity. King Charles and Queen Camilla stepped out first. Then William and Kate. Then George, Charlotte, and Louis, 3 children who have grown up faster in front of cameras than most royal children in living memory. Together, the family looked up at the sky as the Royal Air Force flypast roared overhead, the same tradition that has closed this ceremony for decades, the same image the palace has used, year after year, to say to the country, everything here is exactly as it should be. That is the image the palace wanted you to see. But look closer at the details surrounding that day, and the cracks this story has been tracing all along become visible again. Protesters gathered along the Mall that same afternoon. Not a small, easily ignored handful. Enough to be photographed, enough to make it into the coverage, holding placards bearing images of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor alongside Jeffrey Epstein. One sign read simply, "Down with the Crown." A blunt, public reminder, in real time, in front of international cameras, that the scandal Charles thought he had closed the door on has not actually gone away. Stripping his brother's titles ended a chapter on paper. It did not end it in the public's memory. And in an unexpected twist, Prince Harry released a surprise video message during the parade itself, timed to land in the middle of a day meant to project nothing but stability. Nobody outside his own circle knew it was coming. No advance warning to the palace. No coordination with the moment everyone else had spent months preparing. Just a message, appearing exactly when the family least needed a distraction, and exactly when the cameras were most likely to notice. Whatever the message contained, its timing alone tells you something. Even from a distance, even semi-estranged, Harry remains a variable this family cannot fully control or predict. You can strip a title. You can restrict access. You cannot fully remove someone from a story they were born into. Hi viewers, quick one for you here. When someone you have a complicated history with shows up uninvited on your biggest day of the year, does that feel like sabotage, or does it feel like a cry for attention? Type sabotage or attention below. I want to see which one this audience believes. Meanwhile, separate reports circulating around the same period suggested tension of a different kind entirely. These accounts describe a disagreement between Queen Camilla and William over family heirlooms, serious enough, according to insiders, that it required a direct, private conversation between her and the king. No public details were ever confirmed. No statement addressed it. Just another quiet friction point, surfacing briefly in royal reporting before disappearing back behind palace walls. None of this made headlines the way a scandal usually does. It surfaced in fragments. A protest sign here. A cryptic video there. A rumored disagreement over heirlooms that never got a full public explanation anywhere. Individually, each fragment looks small enough to dismiss. A single sign. A single video. A single unconfirmed rumor. But together, these fragments tell the same story this entire report has been building from the very beginning. A family performing unity in public, on a balcony, in perfect formation, in front of a flypast timed to the second. And underneath that formation, in the same 24 hours, multiple unresolved tensions, all still very much alive, all still capable of resurfacing the moment the cameras look away. That is the pattern this family keeps living inside. Not open conflict. Not public collapse. Just a steady accumulation of small cracks, each one paved over just enough to get through the next ceremony, the next balcony appearance, the next flypast. And every single time, the question underneath all of it stays exactly the same. How long can any family hold that formation before something underneath finally gives way? Every family has a fracture it tries not to name out loud. For the Windsors, that fracture has a name most of the world already knows. Andrew. At the end of 2025, King Charles made a decision that stunned even seasoned royal observers. He formally stripped his brother of his royal titles. Prince Andrew became, officially, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His former wife lost her title as well. No quiet compromise. No soft landing. A public, permanent line drawn under one of the most damaging chapters the monarchy has faced in decades, tied to his association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. That decision cost Charles something. Insiders describe it as emotionally exhausting, a crisis that forced the king to make a choice no monarch wants to make about his own blood. Hi viewers, here's a hard one. If your own brother's actions were threatening to damage everything your family built, would you protect him, or would you cut him loose to protect everyone else? Type protect or cut loose in the comments. I want to see how divided this room really is. Because William, according to multiple sources, did not see this as a difficult decision at all. Insiders describe him as wanting an even harder line than his father ultimately took. In William's view, according to one palace source, Andrew should have been removed from the line of succession immediately and cut out of royal life completely. No gradual process. No lingering ambiguity. That single detail tells you something important about the man who may one day wear the crown. Where Charles moved carefully, weighing decades of family history against institutional damage, William reportedly wanted speed. Certainty. A clean break. Some insiders go further, describing William as increasingly assertive, even power-hungry, within palace circles, pushing for a firmer hand across several fronts, not just where Andrew is concerned. Charles's reported response has been to remind his son who still holds final authority. One source close to the family said the king has made clear he is still very much the one in charge, and that William needs to be patient rather than eager to take over before his time has come. Patience. That word keeps surfacing in this story, again and again, like something the family keeps trying to teach a son who may not have unlimited time left to learn it. If this level of detail is new to you, that is exactly why channels like this one exist. Hit subscribe now, because the next layer of this story goes even deeper into the one relationship testing this family more than any other. That relationship is Harry. Charles, according to insiders, has never fully closed the door on reconciliation with his younger son. Reports suggest the king wants to meet with Harry and his children this summer, and wants William on board with that plan. William, by most accounts, is far less willing. One insider described it as a test Charles has deliberately placed in front of his heir. Within palace circles, there is reportedly a clear sense that reuniting with Harry, however difficult for William personally, represents a real measure of whether he is ready to lead. The source explained it this way. Demonstrating unity is essential to the monarchy's future, and Charles has effectively told William that this is not simply a personal grievance he gets to hold onto forever. It is a leadership question. Put simply, Charles appears to be asking his son to do something enormously difficult. Set aside a personal wound, a real one, for the sake of an institution bigger than either of their feelings. Whether William accepts that test, or continues to resist it, remains genuinely unresolved. Insiders describe trust between the brothers as deeply damaged, with some sources going so far as to suggest that trust may be gone entirely for now. And that is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath everything we have covered so far. A father managing his own illness. A son stepping into unprecedented authority earlier than expected. A family scandal that forced a painful public reckoning. And a second son, still estranged, still a variable neither Charles nor William can fully control. None of these threads exist separately. They are braided together, each one adding pressure to the others, each one shaping how the public interprets every photograph, every joint appearance, every small procedural update coming out of the palace. Consider the position Charles actually occupies here. A man managing a serious illness while trying to run a modern monarchy is difficult enough on its own. Add to that a brother whose actions required a historic, public punishment. Add to that an estranged son whose return remains uncertain. And then add an heir who is, by multiple accounts, growing more assertive by the month, more confident in his own instincts, more willing to voice disagreement with decisions he considers too slow or too soft. That is not a king managing one crisis. That is a king managing several at once, all under public scrutiny, all while trying to look composed enough to reassure a nation watching for any sign of instability. It would be easy to frame William's assertiveness as simple ambition. Some outlets have done exactly that, describing him in blunt terms as a son trying to unseat his father before his time. But that framing misses something important. According to people close to the family, William's urgency is not detached from love. It is tangled up with it. A son who is reportedly worried about his father's health does not necessarily become gentler in his decision-making. Sometimes worry produces the opposite. Sharper instincts. Less patience for delay. A desire to fix what feels fixable, quickly, before time runs out to fix it at all. That instinct may explain his hard line on Andrew. It may explain his hesitation over Harry. Both decisions, from William's perspective, may look less like coldness and more like triage. Protecting what remains of the institution's reputation, and protecting his father's remaining energy, by refusing to let old wounds reopen and consume time and goodwill the family may not have to spare. Charles, for his part, appears to be playing a longer game. Insiders suggest he sees the Harry question not as a distraction, but as a genuine test of character, one final lesson before handing over more responsibility. A monarch, in his view, cannot lead a divided family convincingly while asking a divided country to trust the institution's stability. Whether William passes that test, resists it, or simply runs out of patience waiting to see how it resolves, is still an open question. And it is precisely that uncertainty, laid on top of everything else, that has kept royal watchers and casual observers alike glued to every small development coming out of the palace this year. Which brings us to the one question that connects every thread in this story. With a king managing illness, a son gaining unprecedented authority, and a family divided over how to handle its most painful relationships, what does the palace itself actually say about any of this? The answer, and what it reveals about where this family goes from here, is exactly where we turn next. This is not the first time this exact pattern has played out inside this family. Go back far enough, and you find the same quiet choreography, just with different faces standing on that same balcony. Queen Elizabeth II reigned for over 70 years. 70 years is almost impossible to hold in your head as a single stretch of time. It is longer than most human lives. It is longer than most countries manage to keep the same system of government running without upheaval. And for the better part of the last few decades of that reign, she was quietly doing something the public rarely discussed in real time. She was preparing Charles. Not all at once. Not through any single dramatic announcement. Through decades of small, deliberate transfers. State visits handed to him one by one. Ceremonial duties shifted onto his calendar instead of hers. Public appearances where he increasingly stood not beside her, but for her, representing the crown in rooms she no longer had the strength, or the time, to enter herself. At the time, almost none of it was framed as succession planning. It was framed exactly the way William's expanding role is being framed today. Modernization. Delegation. A natural evolution. Of duties within a busy institution. Commentators debated it constantly, the same way commentators are debating it now. Was this simple efficiency, an aging monarch sensibly sharing the load? Or was it something more deliberate, a slow, careful handover disguised as routine business? Nobody had a definitive answer while she was alive. The palace never confirmed a plan. There was no single leaked memo, no dramatic declaration, nothing you could point to and say, "Here, this proves it." There was only the accumulation. Year after year, duty after duty, quietly shifting in one direction. History did not answer that question until the moment the crown actually passed. Only then, looking backward, did all those small transfers suddenly make sense as a single continuous pattern. Only then did commentators stop debating whether it was happening and start describing, with total confidence, exactly how it had unfolded all along. Hi viewers, here's a thought for you. If you could only understand a pattern in your own life by looking backward, years after it started, would you want someone to warn you while it was still happening, or would you rather find out later, all at once? Type "warn me" or "find out later" in the comments. I am curious which one this audience actually prefers. Britain may be living through the exact same unresolved uncertainty right now, simply wearing a different generation's faces. A king whose health has become impossible to fully hide. A son whose responsibilities keep expanding in small, procedural steps that rarely make a single dramatic headline on their own. Insiders offering the same reassurances that were offered decades ago. Nothing has changed. This is simply how a modern monarchy operates. Maybe that reassurance is true. Maybe, just as it did the last time, history will eventually look back on this exact period, the tired banquet, the quiet warrants, the small unannounced shifts in duty, and describe it as nothing more than a wise king preparing a capable heir, exactly the way his own mother once prepared him. Or maybe, just as it did the last time, the full shape of what is actually happening will only become visible once it is already finished, once the crown has already changed hands, once every small detail we have walked through in this story finally clicks into place as part of a pattern nobody was willing to name out loud while it was still unfolding. That is the uncomfortable truth sitting at the center of every royal transition in modern history. The people living through it rarely get to see it clearly while it is happening. Only the people looking back ever get the full picture. And right now, all any of us can do is watch the pattern accumulate in real time, one balcony appearance at a time, one quiet ceremony at a time, and wonder which version of this story we are actually witnessing. Here is the part of this story that frustrates royal watchers more than any other. Buckingham Palace has said almost nothing. No confirmation of a timeline. No comment on abdication speculation. No public acknowledgement that William's authority has expanded as dramatically as insiders describe. Just silence, carefully maintained, the way this institution has maintained silence through every difficult chapter for generations. That silence is not an accident. It is a strategy. Hi viewers, one more for you before we get into this. When someone you care about goes quiet during a hard time instead of explaining themselves, does that make you trust them more, or does it make you worry more? Type trust or worry below. I am genuinely curious where this audience lands. Because that is exactly the position Britain has been placed in. Watching a family go quiet at the exact moment the public wants answers most. What we do know is this. The palace has never confirmed any secret declaration, any signed transfer document, or any formal handover plan. Reports of a specific, dramatic secret paper being signed behind closed doors do not hold up against what has actually been documented. What has been documented is smaller, slower, and in some ways more believable precisely because it is so mundane. A title here. A ceremony there. A pattern of small procedural shifts that add up to something significant only when you step back and look at all of them together. Royal commentators remain split on what that pattern actually means. Some insist Charles remains firmly, fully in command, pointing to his continued state visits, his continued public decision-making, his refusal to slow down despite his health. Others argue that the accumulation of small changes, taken together, tells its own story regardless of what any official statement says. Both cannot be entirely right. But both cannot be entirely wrong either. If you have stayed with us this long, that tells me something about you. You are not here for shallow headlines. You want the full picture, even when the full picture refuses to resolve into a neat, tidy answer. That is exactly why this channel exists, and exactly why hitting subscribe actually matters. Stories like this deserve more than a 30-second clip and a guess. So where does that leave William, Charles, and this entire family right now? It leaves them exactly where they have been for months. Managing illness without panic. Expanding authority without confirmation. Handling a family scandal that required a historic public reckoning. And navigating a second son whose place in all of this remains genuinely unresolved. Every public appearance since that March banquet has been read through this lens. A joint appearance becomes evidence of unity, or evidence of a carefully managed transition, depending entirely on who is doing the reading. A quiet diplomatic trip becomes proof William is stepping up, or proof he is stepping in. Nothing this family does now happens in a vacuum. Every gesture carries weight it may never have carried before. Walk through the ordinary calendar of a modern royal family for a moment, and you start to see how strange this year has actually been. Trooping the colour. State banquets. Investiture ceremonies. Foreign visits timed around diplomatic necessity rather than family convenience. On the surface, all of it looks routine, the same rhythm the monarchy has followed for decades. Underneath it, according to nearly every source we have referenced, sits a family quietly rehearsing a version of itself that has not officially begun yet. That is what makes this story so difficult to report cleanly. There is no single moment you can point to and say, here, this is where it changed. There is only an accumulation. A warrant here. A tired photograph there. A quote from an anonymous aide that spreads across half a dozen outlets within hours. Individually, none of it proves anything. Together, it has convinced a significant portion of royal watchers that something real is unfolding, whether or not the palace ever puts a name to it. Consider, too, what this means for the public itself, not just the family. Britain has watched monarchs age before. Watched heirs wait before. What feels different this time is the visibility of the waiting. Decades ago, a king's declining health might have stayed largely hidden from public view, managed carefully through selective appearances and cooperative press coverage. Today, a single tired expression at a state dinner becomes a headline within the hour, dissected, reposted, argued over by millions of people who have never met either man. That visibility cuts both ways. It keeps the family accountable in ways past generations never faced. But it also means every private struggle, every quiet adjustment, every attempt to manage a difficult transition with dignity, unfolds under a level of scrutiny no family, royal or otherwise, was ever built to withstand comfortably. Perhaps that is the real story hiding underneath all the speculation about warrants and declarations and secret timelines. Not a family plotting a takeover. Not a king clinging desperately to power. Simply a family trying to navigate an enormously difficult, enormously public transition, in real time, while an entire country watches every flicker of expression for a sign of what comes next. What seems clear, across nearly every credible report, is that this family is not pretending the future does not exist. They are preparing for it, carefully, deliberately, on their own terms, exactly the way Charles reportedly insists it must happen. Whether that preparation accelerates in the coming months, whether health forces decisions no one is fully ready for, or whether this remains a slow, steady handover stretched across years, is something even the people closest to the crown cannot say with certainty right now. What we can say is this. A confirmed diagnosis changed the clock this family is running on. A confirmed expansion of William's authority changed what that clock actually measures. And a family working through old wounds, old scandals, and old loyalties is trying to hold all of it together in front of an audience that is watching closer than it ever has before. It helps, here, to remember that Charles himself once stood exactly where William stands now. Decades spent as the heir. Decades spent being told his moment would come, without ever knowing precisely when. He carried that uncertainty for most of his adult life, watched his own mother reign for longer than almost anyone expected, and reportedly absorbed a particular kind of patience that only comes from waiting that long for something you cannot control. That inherited patience may explain some of the friction insiders describe between father and son today. Charles, having lived an entire lifetime inside uncertainty, may genuinely believe that careful, deliberate pacing protects the institution best. William, watching his father's health falter in real time, may simply no longer have the luxury of thinking in terms of decades. Two men, shaped by two very different relationships with time, trying to steer the same institution through the same uncertain moment. Kate's presence throughout this period matters as well, even though she rarely becomes the center of these particular reports. Her own recovery, her own gradual return to public duties, has unfolded alongside her husband's expanding responsibilities, and by most accounts, she has approached it with the same quiet determination that has defined her public image for years. A family managing two significant health stories at once, while also managing a generational transition of power, is not a small thing to hold together. That so much of it has been held together at all says something about the people involved, whatever you make of the politics surrounding it. None of this erases the tension we have walked through in this story. The scandal that forced Charles to make an unthinkable decision about his own brother. The estrangement with Harry that Charles reportedly still hopes to repair, and that William, by most accounts, remains far more reluctant to revisit. The quiet, procedural expansion of William's authority that some read as natural succession planning, and others read as something considerably more significant already taking shape. What ties all of it together is a single, unavoidable fact. This family is navigating illness, legacy, old wounds, and public expectation, all at the same time, without a script anyone has agreed on. There is no announcement scheduled. No date circled on any calendar that has been confirmed. Only a pattern, watched closely by millions, that keeps suggesting the same quiet conclusion again and again. Change is coming. Nobody outside the palace walls knows exactly when. That tension is not resolving anytime soon. If anything, every source close to this story agrees on one single point. The coming months carry more weight than any period this family has faced in years. Before you go, do one last thing. If this story kept you here until the very end, that is exactly the kind of engagement that tells us to keep digging deeper into stories like this one. Like this video, drop your comment below, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Because there is one thread we have not fully pulled yet. What William himself has said, in his own limited public words, about what becoming king actually means to him, not as duty, but as a personal reckoning most heirs never have to describe out loud this early. That is coming in our next video. You will not want to miss it.